Okay. Anybody? Hello, Ellen. Good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi. Good morning.
I'm bringing in yeah, we're fine. Yeah, Willie said he's fine. Yeah, Willie's back. Willie's here? I didn't see him.
Who's that? You lost some weight. Your face looks so.
I just got a haircut.
Works the same way. Huh?
And I trimmed my beard.
Okay, maybe that's it.
Okay. All right. We're ready. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I do not have, oh, yes. Apparently, didn't do it yesterday. I forgot.
Oh, out of practice.
Listen, we were away. There are things that we put away in our apartment during the 3 weeks that we were here before Shavuos. We couldn't remember where we had put stuff after 2 months. Okay, learning sponsors. A year of learning, Friends of Leonie Meiselman, Leah Saber, Bat Chunuch Zundel, Friends of Melaskotsky, Moshe Zelig, Ben Mordechai, Martin Lippman and family in memory of his wife, Malka Chana Bas Pinchas, Friends of Herb Jeremiah, Tzvi Ben Zev, Friends of Sam Coleman, Shmuel Ben Yaakov, Friends of Gideon Lazinski, Mordechai Shlomo Ben Meir, Bella and David Adler in memory of her father, Eliyahu Ben Yosef Kohen, those who were inspired by our Rebbetzin Emerita, Sheila Shapiro, Sarah Esther Malkabat, Meshulam Yisachar. We have a month of learning by Mark and Catherine Linder, in memory of his mother, Yonah Bat Zalman Leib, Malka and Rabbi Dr. Yankee Honig, in memory of her father, Yosef Ben Yechezkel Yehuda. We have a week of learning by Alan Blumenfeld, in memory of his father, Gershon Ben Hachaver Pinchas HaKohen. And today is the 3rd, right? So we have a day of learning today by Bernice, what? Right? Plitnik, in memory of her father, Yonatan Ben Baruch. Okay, may the Shamas have an aliyah, crank Rafia, Velti Yashir, Shem Lataliah, L'chol B'nai Yisrael, Good Kabench. That
Came back to you.
After a long okay. I'm going to start us off, of course, on Ayin Tet Amud Aleph. We've been talking about the example of the husband throwing the get to the wife. We talked about it, and for example, if he threw it in her, so to speak, lap, in her sewing basket, and throwing it in her. And now we've talked about the fact that he threw it into the courtyard. Okay, and we spoke about the question of the fact that if he perhaps lent her space or rented her space in the courtyard, that's clearly hers. And therefore, the courtyard, which is, I'm going to call the word stable for the moment, non-moving, okay, right? It can therefore acquire the get for her, okay? Gemara, I believe, uses the word mishtameret, okay, in that regard, okay, to keep that thought in mind. And that's why at the end of yesterday's daf, when it raised the question about the husband putting the get into the servant of the woman, okay, why the question is, when he's sleeping, the get was applicable. If he was awake, it was not. And then the discussion really focused, okay? But then the Gemara jumped, I'm suggesting, to focus on the fact, not on his status, but on the status of the Eved himself. Because it challenged the question, how could we say that that would be a valid get if, after all, an Eved is one who's able to move around? And therefore, it's not in the same status as a chatzer, as a courtyard. Okay? Gemara finished up yesterday. Right? The Gemara finished up yesterday by implying that the reason that it was valid was because that the Eved himself was not movable. He was in chains. Okay? So that's where we finished the Gemara yesterday. That was the bottom, right? Okay? And then it went on to some other items about how she held her hand and things like that. But I wanted to focus on that, okay? Because we're going to come back to the issue of the courtyard. Okay. Now I want us to imagine the following. I should have brought the, I used to have the whiteboard. Maybe I'm going to bring that back in here. Okay. Think of the following. Okay. There is a large courtyard. Okay. And the courtyard has walls. Within that, there is another smaller courtyard, okay, in that area. Okay. Now, if that's the case, and the husband has indicated that this area is the area that he has loaned or given over to the wife. Okay. Now, let's assume for the moment that the husband is on this is a house, and the husband is on the roof, and the husband drops the get from the roof down. So where the Kleenex is basically the part of the building. This is the still part of empty space in what we'll call her domain. And this is his domain. Okay? If he throws the get from the roof of the house, can we be sure that it's going to land in her domain? It's possible, okay, that he could throw the get. Now remember, get is written on parchment, folded, okay? So it has some weight to it, but that doesn't mean that a wind might not come. Okay? So can we be sure that that get will land in her, what we call her chatzer, her, okay, and not in his?
Obviously not.
We can't be sure. He is on the roof of that building. Okay. Now, we're going to see that the Gemara goes into a lot of discussion on this kind of a scenario.
Does the get have to just land there and stay there, or does suppose the wind blows it off?
Excellent question, Zev. Excellent question. Okay, that leads us, your question leads us to the item. What about if the get, let's say, passes through in the air over her part of the courtyard and then moves, and the wind blows it then and it lands on his? Okay. After all, the get is resting now in a location. Okay. Does that mean that it's no longer a valid get because it came to rest in his part of the courtyard? Or could I say, well, since the wind blew it, but nevertheless it passed through the avir of her courtyard, that therefore it's a valid get.
By the time he finds it, it's not a
Okay, so excellent question that the Gemara is going to have to really consider that kind of an issue. Okay, So having presented the scenario, I think we can now, and I don't mean to take a long time in an introduction, but I just felt that it might be helpful, okay, to clarify the image going on and then go into the Mishnah and Gemara. Okay, right? Okay, so we're on Ayin, right?
So you'd have to say that that her domain extends up, and that would be for Rishus.
You could argue that. The Gemara might suggest something else. It might suggest that, let's say what happens, and then I'm going to come back into the next, let's say that the walls of his area, okay, are higher than the walls around the house and her area. Could I argue then that since those walls are higher, they actually protect or guard anything within? If that's the case, then her area is protected, is guarded. And so therefore, when the get lands, okay, in her area, that could be the argument, or go through her airspace. That could be the argument that says it's an acceptable get for her.
As an example of
but her area also has walls as well.
Exactly.
So there's a shmira.
Exactly.
Walls.
Ruvain. That's
even though his walls are also
right.
he may have a stone wall, she has a fence.
Okay, but either case, if his walls are higher, it may not depend on what they're made from. Okay.
There's an example similar to that in Baba Metzia.
Could be. Didn't get there yet. Okay, let's go into the text. Matnitin. Haita, okay, says the Gemara, Omedet, who's standing on the top of the wall? She is. Haita Omedet al Rosh Hagag. She's now standing on the roof. Okay? Vizarkula. And he threw her, in other words, he's throwing the get up to her. Okay? Everybody has the image now. Remember, a lot of the roofs were flat and they used it as extra living space. Okay? All right? So he's throwing the get up to her. Okay? Right?
Down.
No. Omedet al Rosh Bizarkula. She's up top, he's below. Right? Omedet, she's standing on the roof. He's below. Kevan she'egia la'or hagag. Once it reaches the airspace of the roof, harei zo migureshet. She is considered, okay, divorced. Hu milamala, v'hi milamata. He's above and she's below. Okay, now they switch it, Ruben, right? Okay, v'zarkula, and he throws it down to her. Kevan sheyatzami rishut hagag. Once it goes past the domain of the roof, nimchak o nisraf, were to become erased or burned, harei zo megureshet. She is also considered to be divorced. Okay? Problem that we have, the Gemara is going to say, it's already presented us two different scenarios. One where she's on top and he's on the bottom. The other, he's on top, okay, and she's on the ground level. Okay? All right. So the Gemara challenges, Vahalo minta. But what about the fact we're saying, okay, it's not protected. It's not a secure location. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, he says as follows, Bagag sheyesh lo maka askinan. We're talking, says Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, about the fact that the area of the roof has a makkah, it has a fence, all right? And so therefore there is a bit of a protection there. Okay, so when he throws it up, okay, he's got to get it, so to speak, over that fence, and it lands on top. Okay, so therefore, once it enters, okay, over the, what do you call it, sidewalls, fence, okay, once it flies over that, folds it up as a paper airplane, like that, and it goes, okay, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel as his suggested reason why in the first case it is a valid get. Okay, now we're going to see other suggestions. Ula bar Menashia, Mishmei de Abimi says as follows: Hacha bepachot mishlosha samuch lagag askina. His argument is we're talking about something that it's within the 3 tfachim of the gag. It's almost like levud. Okay, that's the point. The kol pachot mishlosha samuch lagag kigag dami. That anything like that's within 3 tfachim of the roof. Okay, so according to him, it wouldn't even have to fly over the makkah, so long as when he threw it, it reached within 3 tfachim of the roof. That would have been good enough. That's his answer.
Be over the roof, not be.
Doesn't even
have to go
over.
As long as it's
within 3 tfachim, just like the concept of the void on Sukkot, right? Okay, right. So that's a second explanation. Okay, now we go on. Now we're jumping to our second example, our second scenario in the Mishnah. Hu milamala. Okay, I'm sorry, right? Hu milamala. He's above, right? And she was below. Vahalo mintar. But we say again, isn't it? How can we say that it's protected, that it's guarded? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel says, Kigon shahayu mechito.
It's not guarded.
Right. Vahalo mintar. It's not guarded, right? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Okay, so he was the one who came up with the first suggestion in the first scenario. Okay, about the fence, the roof is fenced in. His suggestion now in the second case is, Kegon shahaya mechitzot hatachtonot odfot al ha'elyonot. Okay, that the lower walls are greater than the upper walls around the roof. Okay, Bakain Amar Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Yoshia. And likewise says Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Yoshia. Kagon shayu mechitzot hatachtonot odfot al ha'elyonot. Okay, that the lower walls, in other words, the outside walls, are higher than the
roof walls.
Than the roof walls.
The roof fence.
Right. 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 In other words, those are the ones that are on the. Think of it as a box within a box, okay? So the walls of the outer larger box are going to be higher, all right, than the walls of the inner box, which is, the inner box is her, okay? All right? So what happens? V'chein amar ula amar Rabbi Yochanan. And likewise says Ula in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So what is significant here, again, Gon shayu mechitzot hatachtonot odfot al ha'elyonot. Okay? We've got 3 different, why do we have 3 different?
The fact that the wall is higher protects it from the wind, so when it goes into lands in her chutzner and the walls of the chutzner, it won't blow out.
Right, right. That's one good point. Right. The lower wall is the one that's on the roof of the house. The other are the walls of the courtyard. Okay? All right. Now, I just want to point this out real quick and then we'll go on. And that is why did the Gemara bring us here 3 different examples with the same answer? Okay, was because in one case, it shows the discussion occurred in Eretz Yisrael. In another case, it showed us that discussion occurred in Bavel. And in the third case, it tells us it was somebody who came from one place and brought the same message to the other place. Okay. All right. So what happens? We go on now. Amarle Rab Abba Le'ula. Keman, according to whom could this be? Karebi, according to the view of Rabbi, who says, the Amar Kaluta Kamisha Huncha Damya, that when the walls, okay, in other words, the airspace is designated and contained, okay, because it's got these, right? What happens? It's as if it does actually rest when the get lands, okay? Amarle afilu tema rabbanan. So he says, wait a second. That may be Rebbe's view, but we can say it even follows the view of the rabbis, okay, who perhaps challenged that view of Rebbe, right? Ad kan lo kaplige rabbanan alei the Rebbe. Up to this point, the rabbis did not challenge the view of Rebbe, elul inyan Shabbat, but only in the case of Shabbat, the mechitzot, the walls. Aval hacha, all right, but here, in other words, in our example of a get, mishum inturehu, since it is protected, it is guarded, right? Therefore, we would say vaha ka mintar. Therefore, it is guarded. In other words, the guest does the get is therefore a viable get, okay, because there is some protection because of the walls, as Reuven was saying, that the outside box walls are higher than the, okay. So the Gemara is going to go into this later in more detail, okay. But I want us to have that image, okay. All right. So you could have, let's say, a 1-story or a 2-story house, okay. But the height of the walls could be 3 stories, okay, to protect the whole area. Right?
Isn't it saying that even if the height of the wall of the outer wall is not so high?
Oh, wait, that's a problem.
So as long as it goes over the fence and it's in the airspace of the roof, it's her territory. That
would be true if we only held by the view of Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel.
It's gathered in the airspace, it's like it's resting.
Right.
Right?
That would be the point. Okay? Because that's what his argument was. If it went over the walls of the house, of the roof, let's call it the roof walls, all right, then he would say it's no problem. Okay? So what happens? Let's go on. So therefore it's protected, meaning it lands and it is valid. Okay? Now, what happens? V'cheina ma Rabbi Asi ma Rabbi Yochanan. And likewise says Rabbi Asi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Kagon shayu mechitzot hatachtonot odfot al ha'elyonot. That the lower walls of the entire courtyard are taller than the roof walls. Okay? Amarle Rebbe Zera le Rabbi Asi. Come on. According to whom is that? Karebi. Again, it's like Rebbe. The Amar Kaluta Kamisha Hun Chadamya. Because again, we're saying that once it is contained, okay, that is the case. Amarla, he said to him, Afilu Tema Rabbanan. You could even argue again that the rabbi should accept that. Ad kan lo plige Rabbanan alei the Rebbe. Up to this point, the rabbis did not disagree with Rebbe. Why? Elele inyan Shabbat, but rather in regards only to the issue of Shabbat. Okay? Aval hacha, but here, again in our example of Gittin, mishum inturehu, because it is protected, bahaka mintar, indeed it is considered guarded or protected. Okay? So we now have a clear argument as to, in the first scenario, Okay, he's throwing the get up to her. Okay, and we have, despite how good the answers given by Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, okay, or Ula, nevertheless, we have a clear understanding that there was a Masorah both in Eretz Yisrael and in Bavel as to how the situation is to be understood. So it's a valid get. Okay? Okay, now our next section from our Mishnah was what happened if somehow while the get was flying in the air, it got erased. Okay? Nimchak, says our Mishnah.
It was raining. And
that would be an option. Yeah, right. Very good. I didn't even think of that, Reuven. Excellent. Excellent.
It's raining, is that what it says?
His suggestion is it's raining.
Or it fell in water and the water.
Well, but the question is, if it fell in the water, it would have landed already. And it has a place of, okay? So if it's
landed in water in the courtyard. It landed in the courtyard, which is the valid place, but it landed in a little pond.
So let's see.
And it got.
But once it was less than 3 feet above the ground, it was already in the airspace, so it's okay.
Right. Should be, right. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara tells us. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Abuha, Lo Shanu Ela Shenimchak Derech Yerida. He says it only occurred, it got erased somehow as it was floating through the air. Okay, that's why I like your suggestion of raining better. Okay, aval nimchak derech aliyah, but if it got erased on its way up? Okay, when he had folded it like a paper airplane and shot it up there, no, that's not the case. My tama, what would be the reasoning? Meikara lola minche kai. Why? Because we would say it never then came to a resting place in its proper way, in its proper such status.
How would you know? I was thinking the same thing. But
why? Because it.
How would you know when it got erased?
Why? Because when it lands there on the top of the roof, okay, and she opens up this paper airplane to read what it says, it's erased. You see the ink running down the parchment.
The question still is, you would know, was it on the way up or on the way down?
Well, they said.
It was erased on its downward path.
No. He says, what about if it's erased on its upward path? Okay? Because that's why Reuven's.
It's a tremendous finish to say that an erased
right can come in. In other words, he's throwing a document down, and what is he supposed to be yelling? Honey, this is a get. Don't worry if it's erased, but it's a get. If it comes near to you, anywhere near to you, you are divorced. Sorry that it's heavy raining and I got to catch a plane. So here it is. I mean, I know. See, it's very difficult to. It's dochak. That's what you're saying. Okay, but that's why I like Reuven's suggestion of the rain. Interesting enough, the preparation, nobody mentioned that. Nisraf was the next piece in the Mishnah. What happens if it became burnt? Okay, now where is the fire? The fire is probably in the chatzer, in the courtyard, either her part or his part.
And that's remote, but what about the lightning?
Lightning, maybe. Okay, so what happens? Amar Rab Nachman Amar Rabba bar Abuha, Lo Shanu Ela Shekadam Get L'Dlika. This was only taught, okay, if the get was already, so to speak, on its way before the fire, right? Aval kadma delika leget, but if there was a fire before the get, okay, was dispatched, okay, no, it's not going to be valid. My tama, what's the reasoning? Meikara l'sreifa ka'aziu. We're saying that in that situation, okay, one is going to assume that it's going to get burnt up mela. Okay, so in other words, there's no valid force that's going to be able to prevent the get from being destroyed. So it's not going to be valid.
You can say the same thing about raining. It was
Fear,
it's going to be destroyed.
you could, but interesting that the Gemara didn't bring that, right? Okay. Amar Rav Chisda, says Rav Chisda, Rishuyot chalukot begittin. So now we have a new piece, a Braita, okay, from Rav Chisda, that he says that with regards to a get, we have different, I'm going to call them domains. That's the best term that I could think of. Locations vary, okay, domains. Amarle, Rami Bar Chama l'Rab. Minale l'Sabaha. How is it that, and this is not making fun of Rav Chisda's age, how is it that this, our elder, in other words, our master, our older teacher, how is it that he can say that with regards to the issue of get, we can say there are different domains. Different locations, right? Amarle matnitni. He says to him, we can learn this as a result of our Mishnah. Haita omedet al Rosh Hagag. Our Mishnah said that first she was standing on the roof of the house. Okay? V'zarkula, and he threw it, we said, up to her. Kevan shehigia get la'avir Hagag. Once the get reached the airspace of the roof, harei zo megoreshet. Okay? She is divorced. But Maya's Kenan,
so
what?
You see, there's his rishus of with the chutzner where he threw it, and her rishus of the gag where.
Okay, so that would be one example, right, Ruvain? Okay, in other words, that he rents her, loans her, gives her certain space. Okay, so it seems to be that that's one example. He's below in the chatzer, she's on the roof of the house. That's her rishus, that's his rishus. Maybe he's got a patio out there, swimming pool, who knows? Okay, but Maya's Kenan, what are we talking about? Ilema bagag dida, v'chatzer dida. If we were talking about a situation where the roof is hers and the courtyard is hers, lama li avir hagag. Why then do we have to discuss this whole issue of the airspace of the roof? Ella, we must be talking about a situation, begag didei, v'chatzer didei. Maybe we're talking about where the roof is his and the courtyard is his. If that's the case, ki higia la'avir hagag, ma'i have it. Even when it reaches the airspace of the roof, what of it? What benefit is it? Okay, ela pshita, but rather it must be obvious. Begag dida, b'chatzer didei, that the roof is hers and the courtyard is his. Ema seifa. But wait a minute. What about the second part of our Mishnah? What is that telling us? Hu milamala, vehi milamata. Okay, he is above and she is below. V'zarkula, and he threw it to her. Kevan shiatsa merishut hagag. Once it came beyond the parameter of the roof, right? Nimchak, it became erased, onisraf, or it became burned. Harezo migureshet. Our Mishnah said that she is divorced. And now we go back again to figure out. Ve'i begag dida v'chatzer didei. If we're saying the roof is hers and the courtyard is his, amai migureshet. Why then would she be divorced? Ella, but rather what must we have? Begag didei v'chatzer dida. That must deal with the situation of the roof is his and the courtyard is hers. So the Gemara has a problem with that explanation. Our first part of the Mishnah, when he's, right, when she's standing on top and he's below, and he's throwing it up to her.
Right.
Okay?
He's standing on the bottom.
On the bottom, throwing it up to her, right. Reisha begagdida v'chatzer didei. The beginning part would make the roof hers and the courtyard his.
So they're two opposite cases.
Seifa, whereas the second part of our Mishnah, begagdidei v'chatzer dida. You're saying then that the second part, the roof is his and the courtyard is hers? Elelav de'ushla makom. No, it must mean that he must have lent her space. Okay? Dechad makom mushle inshe. Because one location a person is willing to lend. Trei mikomot lo mashle inshe. Two places, okay, people don't lend. Okay, so what happens? Amarle mide area. So then what is the result here? Dilma hakitaita bahakidaita. Maybe this is like what it was, and this is like what it was. Reisha bagagdi da v'chatzer didei. The first part of our Mishnah was where the roof was hers and the courtyard is his. Seifa begagdi dei v'chatzer dida. And the end part of our Mishnah is where the roof is his and the courtyard is hers. Okay. Now, having defined it that way, we move on. Okay, everybody okay? Amar Rava, says Rava as follows. Okay. Now, notice, by the way, that we kept saying that where the rabbis had an argument with Rebbe, it was the difference between get and Shabbos. Gemara wants to clarify the fact that there are going to be three different instances, okay, where we see that there are marked distinctions between get and Gittin and Shabbos. Okay, first case, all right, Shalosh midot begittin. Okay, there are basically three unique laws. I'm going to say it regarding the get. Right, first one. Hada Amar Rebbe, as in the case of Rebbe, first one, Kluta Kamisha Huncha, that if it lands in a place that's contained, that it's like it's rested properly.
If it's in the airspace,
Right.
it's like it's rested.
It's like it's rested.
Right.
Right? Upligi Rabbanan, and the rabbis disagreed with him. Okay? Hani Mili Le'inyan Shabbat. This was in regards to the airspace, in regards to Shabbat, okay? But not aval hacha, but here because of the get, in our case, mishum inturehu, because it is guarded, protected, okay? Therefore, baha mintar, we consider it guarded and protected, okay? We go on, okay? Vahada amar Rav Chisda. Now we get to the second example. But what about that Rav Chisda said? Okay, that a get has to be mishameret, right? Na'atz kana b'reshut hayachid. Let's say somebody put a pole in the public domain, and on top of the pole is a basket, okay? B'reshut hayachid, I'm sorry, right? In the private domain, and they put on top of the pole is a tray or a basket, okay? Uberosho tar sakal. That's what's on a basket or a tray, right? Vizarak, and it was thrown. V'nacha gabav, and the get lands on top of this pole with the basket. On the tray or in the basket, okay? Right. Hire the guy for basketball. Afilu gavoa me ama, even if it's 100, right? Amaha chayav lafisha rishut hayachid ole ad larakia. Okay, in that case, he would be chayav of being over on Shabbos. Why? Because we say that in a private domain, okay, the domain goes all the way up to him.
So he threw it from the Rosh Hashanah where it was standing up into the Shosayach.
Right. Hani mili le'inyan Shabbat. No, that's only in regards to the height of the domain. That's Shabbos. Aval hacha, But with regards to the get, a get, mishum interehu, because it is protected or guarded, vaha lo intar. But here, it's not necessarily considered protected. Let's go over to the map, right? So that's the next one. Vahada Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. But what about what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel? Lo ya'amod adam bagag zeh v'yilkot megishamim megagal shel chavero. Here's a good example of your rain, right? Okay. Okay, so we have a rule that a person should not stand on his roof and collect the rainwater from his neighbor's gutter. Okay, that's what it's saying, right? V'ilkot megishamim megago shel chavero. Shekashem shadiyurim chalukin milamata. The same way that there are separate residences below, right? What happens? Kach diyurim chalukin milamala. So therefore, there are separate areas on the roof designated for each person. In other words, okay, if you're living on the top floor, okay, in Israel, you know that when you own property and you live on the top floor, you have what's called roof rights. Okay, so that in theory, you could build on the roof another floor, another level of your apartment. Okay, so what happens? Hani mili le'inyan Shabbat. But this is particular in regards to Shabbos. Aval le'inyan get. But in regards to a get, okay, what do we say there? Mishum kapedahu. There it only depends if somebody is particular about it, about their location. In other words, the implication seems to be here that, think of the old story of David and Bathsheba. Okay, all right. It could have been bathing on any part of the roof, not necessarily on a section of the roof that, quote, was her section. Okay. Okay. V'chuli hai lo kapte inshe. And in this regard, people aren't particular about it. Okay. Now, going on. Amar Abai, says Abai, shtei chatzerot. Okay. So here Abai is clarifying for us what we talked about when I said a box within a box. Okay, you have the larger courtyard with walls, and within that is a smaller courtyard where the house could be.
Right? It's inclusive of the law.
What?
I mean, the other way around.
Okay, so that's Abai, shtei chatzerot. Zo lifnim zo, one inside of the other. Pnimit shala, the smaller one inside is hers. V'chitzona shalo, and the larger one is his. Umechitzot hachitzonot, and the outer walls, namely of his, right? Odfot al hapnimiot, are greater than the smaller one. V'zarkula, and he threw it to her. Kevan shehigia la'avir mechitzot hachitzona. Once it went the airspace of the outer walls. Harei zo miguresha. She would be divorced. Ma'itama. What's the reasoning? Pnimit, gufa, the inner ones themselves, b'mechitzot hachitzona, are within the outer walls, ka mintere, and therefore the outer walls already provide a means of protection for whatever is in the inner walls. Okay, masha ein kain b'kupot, which is not the situation with baskets or boxes. Shtei kupot zo b'toch zo, one box or basket inside of another. Pnimit shala, where the smaller basket might be hers, v'chitzona shalo, and the larger basket could be his. V'zarkula, and he threw the get into the basket. Afilu higila avir pnimit, even when it would enter the airspace of the smaller basket, einam migureshet, she would not be divorced. Ma'itama, what would be the reasoning? Dahalonach, because here we can say it really did not come to rest, right? V'chinach ma'ihave, and were it to come to the rest, what would be the status? Kelav shalokeach b'reshut mochehu. Can't we compare that to the example we had yesterday, where the purchaser's produce are still in the domain of the seller? We said there that it belongs to the purchaser. Okay? Hacha b'mayaskinen. What are we talking about? B'kupa she'en la shulayim, where perhaps the basket had, or the box had no bottom. That was the point. Okay, now, new Mishnah. Beit Shammai omrim poter adam ishto beget yashan. Okay, according to Beit Shammai, a man can satisfy the requirement for a divorce using a get yashan. Okay, yesterday we attempted to define the get yashan as a get, okay, that had been written, and somehow he had, after the get was written, okay, before it was delivered, he had seclusion with her, perhaps intimacy even. Okay, another possible definition of a get yashan, okay, is that the get has a date on it, okay, but that's not the date, but that's not the occasion when it was delivered. Okay, it was written in, I'll say it was written in Adar, and now, okay, it was delivered in Av. Okay, you got, right? So, Beit Shammai says that's viable. Beit Hillel Osrin, Beit Hillel says it's forbidden. Ve'ezehu get yashan, and our Mishnah clarifies, Kol shenit yached ima me'achar shektavo la. Anytime he's had seclusion with her, okay, after the get was written. Okay, the assumption being that they could have had relation.
Even if the get was not given.
Definitely
the get was
right, when the get was not delivered to her, right? Okay, okay. By the way, notice that is the, right? In any case, what happens? Gemara b'may k'miflagay. What are they arguing about? Beit Shammai savrei lo amrinin gezerah shema yomru gita kodem libna. Beit Shammai says, we do not say that this has got to be a decree lest the get, okay, let she become pregnant and the get was delivered, okay, before the child was born, okay, because we're concerned about the fact, not so much mamzeru per se, okay, but that the child is pasul, okay, in other words, he's got a bad reputation because he was born out of wedlock, not necessarily mamzer, okay.
Suppose they're in private and he gives her the get, but he has no witnesses. No one has seen it.
Good question.
Wouldn't that be the same as if he didn't give it to her?
There really needs to be a right?
Okay. You can bring Adam in, but wouldn't be very private.
All right. Okay. So what happens? Beit Hillel Savrei, says Beit Hillel is of the opinion, Amrei Gzera, Shema Yomru Gita Kodem Libna. That there's a Gzera, lest people say, okay, that, all right, when was the get delivered? Okay, the Kacha was born first. Amar Rav Abba Amar Shmuel, he says, Im Niseit, if it were such that this occurred, and she had married, Lo Teitsei, she does not need to divorce the second husband. V'ika da Amre, and there are those who I'm going to say further say, Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Shmuel, because notice it's the same person. Okay? Im Nitgarsha, if she's been divorced, and we recognize Tinaseh lechatchila, she should marry right away. Okay? All right, now let's go through, we'll go a bit more. All right, and then we'll finish up. Oh, it's 9:30. We didn't used to have a clock in here, did we? All right, anyway, matnitin. Katav l'shum malch. Right, this Mishnah, as we're going to do, we just said that the get has got to have a date on it. Okay? And as well as other information. Okay? Matnitin, says a Mishnah. K'tav l'shum malchut she'ena hogenet. What happens if they date the get according to an inappropriate date connected with a certain rulership, monarchy? Okay? In other words, the get is written according to what calendar? Jewish calendar.
Written,
right?
they say it was written like the first reign of so-and-so.
That would be the example, okay? What does it mean? The Shum Malchut Madai, say it was written for the Median Empire. The Shum Malchut Yavan, say it was written according to the Greek Empire. In other words, Greek dates, Persian calendar, Greek calendar, right? Levinyan Habayit, okay, for the building of the temple. The Churban Habayit, the destruction of the temple. Hayab Mizrach v'katav b'marav, okay, in the east, and it was written in the west. B'marav v'katav b'mizrach, in the west, and it was written in the east. Teitzei mizeh u'mizeh. We see here now a number of penalties. The woman must divorce each husband. Okay? Utzricha get mizeh u'mizeh, and she needs a get from each of the husbands. Ve'ein la lo ketubah, and she receives no ketubah money from either of the husbands. Velo perot, and she does not, and this is a problem, but briefly, she does not get any payback from the usufruct that the husband had, right?
The husband doesn't have to redeem it.
Right.
He gets the
Okay,
usufruct
that's right, because he gets the usufruct to be able to redeem her from captivity. Right. Velo mizonot, he doesn't even have to pay for her meals. Velo blaot, he doesn't have to pay for clothing, worn out clothes, things like that. Lo alzeh, velo alzeh, not for this or this. Im natla mizeh mizeh, and if she did take it from one or the other, tachzir, she has to return it. V'havlad mamzer mizeh mizeh. Here we get to the point. Then that child, why? Because the oraita, she was still married to the first guy. Okay, it wasn't a valid get. So marrying the second guy, she's committed, right? Adultery, right? Velo zemetamin. And if she were marrying a Kohen, he couldn't bury her, right? Velo zakayin lo b'metziata. And neither husband can acquire anything she finds, velo b'maseh yadeha, and not her handiwork, velo b'hafarat nidareha, nor can they cancel her vows. Haita bat Yisrael, and were she to be a Israelite daughter, nifselet mina kehuna, she is therefore, okay, exempted from being able to marry a Kohen. All right, now I'm going to, all right, but
she's forbidden.
Right, she's forbidden. Just a quick top of pay. Bat Levi min hamaaser. Further penalty. She is the daughter of a Levite. She doesn't get the tithe. Bat Kohen min hatruma. Daughter of Kohen, she can't eat truma. Ve'ein yoshin shel zeh, yoshin shel zeh. And neither the heirs of this husband nor the heirs of this husband, yoshin ketubata. Okay, will basically inherit her ketubah. We'll stop right there, okay, and we'll pick up, okay, with that Mishnah at that point. What? No, that's still part of it. It's a long Mishnah. It goes, we'll quickly review. Okay. All right. Okay.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you. Alan Kessler. Take care, Alan.
Hopefully we'll see you in person soon.
Okay. No, thank you.
That's true. All right, Mel? You hear that? We're going to have to start thinking about a siyum for Gittin. You're already thinking, great. Great. And I will be here actually. Because I leave the next day again. I got to check the dates. Karen makes all the trouble. We're going, we have a wedding in Boston. Okay, so we're flying to Boston. Okay, then from Boston, we're flying back to Israel. And we'll be back there till, I think, Chol HaMoed Sukkot. And then we're flying from there to New York. And then we'll spend the last days with our children and grandchildren in White Plains.
After that, you're going to be in the village.
The reason basically the extended stay now is the question of whether we're going to decide to make Aliyah. Because if you make Aliyah, you have a requirement that you have to stay 6 months in a day in Israel to be able to get the appropriate zechuyot. That's the thing. Oh yeah. What we would probably do to satisfy the requirement, what seems to make the most sense, would be like many other snowbirds. We would go after Pesach, and therefore, whenever that is, and then we would stay and then come back after, depending on when Sukkot, you know.
Okay. So you informed the rabbi that you won't be speaking today.
Yeah. I told him a long time ago, but I think I have to. Yeah, that was. Didn't I just read that? And, hold on a second. I kept. Well, in memory of her father. Yeah, it's not. Yeah. Okay. Well, I tried, Bob. You know, I don't consider myself the best Muslim this year. All right, Lorraine, I'll put my stuff away and I'll meet you later. We figured since we were coming back to this wedding, we came back a week or two early. Yeah. And scheduled doctor's visits. Oh yeah. So every day, you got a doctor's either Karen or I. And some days we both have.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I have to send you an email to see when you want to eat.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning. that?
Should take only the manufacturing changes.
Yes, we got-
Yeah.
You said we're gonna have to start working on a new one.
No.
Yeah.
No, this is last year's stuff.
It's good to keep a couple around just to be able to mark it up and make corrections and changes and things like that. Okay. Want to go this way?
Okay.
This morning when I came in, I decided to try the other door with my key card. And it worked.
I get it going the other one every day.
That's it. Yeah.
My understanding that once you leave Boston, you're gone till Sukkot time.
Yeah.
And so we're in substitution mode.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna do another list.
Yeah. Okay. That's the first time I tried coming in over here, and it worked out well. Because my as I started mentioning, so the